Hi, we are going to be talking about functions in this video, or at least the very basics of functions. So functions, we have already seen functions. We've used quite a few of Python's built-in functions, such as print, such as range, such as length. So these have been very, very helpful in programs that we've written so far, right? Our very first program used print to do the very basic stuff, and range, we have been using it in the for loop and etc. Okay, so why functions? So imagine Python didn't provide any of the function we just talked about. So instead, in order to print something on the screen, we have to know how to put some strings on the console, right? Um, Believe it or not, for something as simple as print, it's actually quite complicated. Um, and it involves, making system calls and putting the right value in the right register and all that stuff that we don't really want to concern ourselves with. So yes, it's very complicated, but compared to all those details, just calling print and then hello world is really very simple, right? For another example, how do we generate a sequence of numbers like range does? Well, we kind of know how to do that. But imagine if we have to do that every single time we write a for loop. That's a lot more complicated than just writing range and the number of times to repeat. Right? So functions, what they do is they hide, or here's the an SAT word for you if you don't already know this. It encapsulates potentially very, very complicated implementation details. Okay. And it also allows us to perform potentially very complicated tasks very easily and repeatedly, like what we do with print and what we do with range. We use that all the time, and we do them very easily because we can just call a function. So since some functions are so useful, not only that we can actually use Python's built-in functions, we can define our own, and this is what we are going to do today. So, okay, why do we want to define our own functions other than the reasons we already talked about? Okay, so for one thing, um, the code that we've been writing are getting longer and longer, right? The instructor solution to assignment number 2 is about 60 lines. For assignment number 3, which is due soon, it's 80 lines. So the complexity is increasing, right? And the real world projects out there, these projects are thousands and even millions of lines. So imagine all of those lines in one file and just going down in for loops and while loops and stuff. It gets really hard to manage. And for real life um, analogy of if we don't have any other way of organizing our code. So imagine in our module readings, we have, instead of topics broken down into weeks, we have just one giant module with, I don't know, 120 topics for all 10 weeks or 12 weeks. Well, that's a lot of things to go through in just one flat structure, right? Or imagine your house. Your house has living rooms, bedrooms, bathrooms, right? They all serve their own purpose. But imagine, yeah, you actually don't have partitions, don't have walls in your house. So there's no separate rooms. You can't even imagine how to live in a house like that, right? Or in a shopping mall, where current shopping mall, you have separate retail store. One store might sell you groceries, another store might sell you shoes. So instead of that, there's no separate stores. One giant mall where any merchandise, any product can be anywhere. Well, that's what life would be if we don't have ways to um, modularize to complex projects into smaller parts. And thankfully, um, we do have a bunch of tools that can help us to cope with uh, the increasing complexity. So function is one of them. Other things that we will learn either later, either this quarter or in another class, are objects, files, packages, libraries, etc. So again, we're going into functions in a little in more details today. Okay, so what does a function look like? So let me just, yes, this is what it is. And yes, well, I wrote that up already. So um, the important thing is when we want to define a function, okay, we start with the keyword def, short for define. Okay, so this tells Python we are defining a function. And then followed by def, a space, and then the name of the function. Okay, I'm defining a function that prints our greeting message here, so I call it greetings. So this is the name of the function. Now the style for the name of a function is the snake case. If you remember, that's the same style for variable names. Okay, so basically all lowercase, if you have multiple words, you separate them with an underscore. So snake case for the name of functions as well. And then after the name of the function, it's a pair of parentheses. Okay, for now they're empty. We might put things into it later. Okay, and follow that, you have colons, just like your conditionals and loops. We're going to start a block of code. Now, before we get to the block of code in a function, this is optional, but it's generally recommended that you have a doc string here. Excuse me. What the doc string does, it kind of is a brief message describing what this function does. Now, for now, a very short sentence like this is fine. It basically says here this function prints a greeting message. It can get actually very elaborate, and there's a whole format to this doc string. But for now, a short sentence is good enough. Okay, and notice it must be indented. This is already a start of the body of a function, and then what this function actually does is in this indented block of code. So in this case, it's very simple. I just define a variable called a message, and then I print that message out. Okay. Yeah, that's what this slide is really trying to say. All here should be exactly the same. Now, it's important to realize what this is. We defined a function. Okay, does it actually do anything? Well, let's try to run this piece of code. It does nothing. Okay, defining a function does not mean that we are using the function. This is just a function definition. It says what to do. It doesn't do anything just yet. So so this is an example of what really is a function definition, right? This is kind of like a formula for the area of circle, which is pi r squared, right? We have a formula, but we haven't really used it for anything. Okay, in order to actually use a function, we have to call it or invoke it. Okay, it means the same thing. Calling a function, invoking a function is the same thing. So how do we invoke it? We start with the name of the function, and then we follow it with the pair of parentheses. So that's how we call a function. And now when we run it, There, it actually does something now. So what actually happened here? If you want to see what the interpreter or the Python interpreter actually does step by step. So, well, I added an extra message at the end here. This is done greeting. Okay. When I run it, it prints out the greeting first, and then it says done greeting. Now, how it actually works is, okay, when the Python interpreter encounters the definition, it kind of remembers, okay, there's a function called greetings, right? Next thing, it comes to this line that actually calls the function greetings, and Python's already seen the definition for greetings, so it knows now to pass the control of the script to this function. So the next line it's going to execute is actually going to come inside this function and execute the first line of this function. Well, I mean, this is the first line, but that's just a doc string, so it doesn't actually do anything. This is the first line, excuse me, that it actually does something, right? And kind of notice that we enter through the function greetings through this call. That's why there's still an arrow here so that we remember where we come from. Okay, so once we executed the first line in the function, as usual, it goes to the next line. So it does a print. It prints the message. The message has the value hello world. So that's why that hello world is put on the screen. Now, here it reaches the end of the function. Okay, this function is done. This is the last line in the function. So what happens next is, because we enter into the function through this line, and when this function finishes, the control returns to the same line. Okay, and then because greetings is already done, it moves on to the line after that, and that's when it prints done greeting. Okay, so this is what happens when the function is actually called. And just a few more terminologies. They're important to know because we're going to be using them. For a function, when a function is involved, the caller is the code that calls the function. So here, the caller is really kind of the top level script, right? It's greeting. We're calling greetings here. So this is the caller, and then the callee is the function that is being called. And in this case, well, it's just the the function greeting. So there's the caller and the callee. Okay. So remember these terminologies. We're going to be using them. And here are a couple kind of common mistakes that for first time programmer might make when they start doing working on functions. So the first thing is, in order to invoke a function, that function must have already been defined before it's invoked. So that means, here's the definition, right? It's defined before I called it. If I actually move the calling the function before the definition, well, it's not going to work, and PyCharm's kind of already telling you, yeah, it's unresolved. So it's not going to be happy, and if you run it anyway, it's going to tell you, hey, at this line number 4, I don't know what greeting is. I haven't seen it. So don't do that. Define the function before you call it. Okay. And the second very common mistake that at least I've seen is you call a function, but you forget to put parentheses. And In this particular case, the editor PyCharm and even the Python interpreter is not going to get angry at you. It will just do nothing. It did not call the function at all, because believe it or not, this is actually valid Python syntax. This basically just refers to the function itself, and there's actually some very good use cases for syntax like this, but not something we're concerned with right now. And I think it actually does kind of warn you, yeah, that this statement is telling you it doesn't do anything. So you probably should replace with call to have effect. Does it actually fix itself? So yes, if you tell Python to fix it, if you heed the warning of PyCharm and tell it to fix it, it will actually fix it for you. Right? It kind of realized you probably meant to call it. So remember to put parentheses after the name of the function when you want to call it.